besties. My name is Brittany. This is Rescues and Reads. Thank you so much for joining me here today. If you are new, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. And if you're already subscribed, as always, I appreciate your continued support. Thank you for returning to another video. Today, I thought that I would share some of the ways in which I lowered my physical TBR below double digits and how I plan to kind of keep it around that number. Now, one of the biggest trends that you'll see going on in the booktube community are creators finding unique and creative ways to lower their physical TBR. The most popular of this, of course, is Shelve It or Scrap It from Becca and the Books, and I absolutely love this series. I love watching it every month, and there are creators putting their own fun twists on this, trying to find a way to lower their physical TBR. And like I said, I really love watching those videos, and every single time I watch one, I'm like, wow, I really wish I could do something like this too. And then I remember that I've already accomplished what a lot of these booktubers are trying to accomplish, and that I have almost completely demolished my physical TBR. Now granted, my physical TBR numbers were never as drastic as some of these content creators. I think at the most, I only ever had one full Billy bookcase of unread TBR books. I don't know how many books a Billy bookcase can house, maybe like 100, 120 or so, but it definitely took a lot of work over a couple of years and conscientious changes to my book buying habits in order to get my physical TBR down to where it is now. Because I am actually not somebody who believes that you can only just focus on reading your physical TBR and have it actually help resolve the problems that we're currently facing. And I know that's probably a hot take. A lot of people might not agree with me or might not like hearing that, but I'm really no stranger to having unpopular opinions when it comes to the book haul culture that we see on BookTube or just the online bookish community in general. I am not somebody who believes that reading and book buying are two separate hobbies. I believe that if you are bringing in unread books into your home, your intent should be to read those books. And I'm definitely not somebody that believes that unhauling a bunch of unread books from your physical TBR should be the default way. And it's definitely not a sustainable way to consistently lower your physical TBR. And I certainly don't believe that just focusing on those physical TBR books is going to be a permanent solution to the problem. I think it's like a two-pronged approach. You have to read the physical books on your TBR, and you also have to change the way that you approach book buying, or at the very least, that your priority is to read significantly more from your physical TBR than you are actually bringing in. So I just thought that I would share some of the tactics that I used to lower my physical TBR. Now, I am in no way, shape, or form saying that my ways were the only ways to do this or the only right ways and that it's going to be right for everyone, because it certainly is not. It's definitely not going to be useful for anybody who has no intention on changing the way that they buy books, right? So I just wanted to go ahead and share some of my thoughts and my tips and tricks and hope that you find them at least useful or potentially inspiring to create your own way to tackle your physical TBR. Now, I first started this journey a couple of years ago. I want to say it was probably back in 2022 or thereabouts, because like I said, the most unread physical TBR books that I had was a full Billy bookcase. And I had accumulated all of these books over a couple of years after first discovering the online bookish community and discovering Book Outlet and things like that, after I had finally gotten back into reading as an adult. And so I was just hoarding books, right? Any book that was at least remotely popular or I thought could be of interest to me, I was grabbing those up and I was putting them on my shelves. And of course, I wouldn't get to them immediately, and they would go on my shelves, they would stay there for however long, and by the time I would get around to them, I would realize that I'm not really interested in reading these books any longer. And so I was unhauling large amounts of books from my physical TBR that I had never read. And I realized that I just didn't want to do that anymore. I realized that it wasn't sustainable. It didn't align with my goals to be a more conscientious consumer. And so I decided right then and there that I was going to attempt to lower my physical TBR and actively change the way that I approached book buying. And one of the first things that I realized that I had to do for myself was that I had to walk away from the scarcity mindset. I realized that a lot of the reason why I was purchasing books was because I felt like I had to have these books right here, right now, because what if for some crazy reason, when I was ready to read them in the future, maybe they weren't going to be available for me, right? Or I also realized that I was using the books on my physical TBR as a method of keeping track of what I actually wanted to read, because I didn't want it to be an out of sight, out of mind scenario. So I felt like I had to own all of the books that I wanted to read in order for me to remember that I wanted to read them, which is really silly in hindsight because I wasn't actively reading them right away. I wasn't even thinking about them. And then I would actually go to my physical TBR shelf, I would review it and realize, oh, I don't actually want to read these books. So clearly something wasn't working. And I definitely knew that there were other ways that I could track the books that I wanted to read, such as maybe a spreadsheet, or more commonly is the Goodreads want to read shelf. Like anytime I wanted to read a book, all I had to do is go ahead and add it to that shelf, and then it would be there as a reminder of what I wanted to read. So I had to kind of change my entire mindset when it came to book buying. I also had to realize that just because a book is on sale, if I wasn't intending on purchasing that book anytime soon, it's not saving me money if I purchase it while it's on sale. So there was a really huge mindset shift that had to take place for me. And it was such a dramatic mindset shift that even to this day, I cannot do retail therapy with books, because in my head, I'm thinking, am I going to read these books immediately? And if not, I don't even want to pick them up, right? Because they're just going to go on my shelves and they're instantly going to be another thing on my to-do list. Whether I'm planning on reading it now or way in the future, it is something that's on my list to do, and I didn't want that. I didn't want anything else on my to-do list. So retail therapy with books doesn't even work anymore, just because I'm now so in the habit of thinking if it's coming into my home, I need to read it as soon as possible. It needs to become a priority read for me. So that was the biggest thing for me, was doing a complete shift in the way that I thought of books and book buying and bringing them into my home. And perhaps the next biggest shift that I made was attempting to read books before bringing them into my home. Y'all know that I'm a really big audio reader. The majority of books that I have on my shelves are books that I've never actually read physically. They are just my book trophies. They're books that I absolutely love and want to have a physical representation of my love of that book. So as a big audiobook reader, that allows me to listen to a lot of books that I want to get to before making the decision on whether or not to bring them into my home. Now, I know that's not going to work for everybody, because some people just don't enjoy audiobooks, or their preferred method of reading is to actually physically sit down and read. So some other ways I would recommend that you could potentially read a book before bringing it into your home is obviously the library. Utilize your library services. Now, if you are like me and you have a very, very small local library system, I actually subscribe to a few out-of-state library systems that charge you an annual fee in order to access their catalog. And this has worked wonders for me because it gives me access to such a wide array of audiobooks and ebooks. So if you have the budget in order to do that, and you have a small library system that doesn't really give you a lot of the books that you're looking for, or maybe there are extremely long, excessive wait times at your library, you could potentially look into one of these. The three that I subscribe to are the Houston Public Library, the Broward County Library in Florida, and the Queens Public Library in New York. So that is just an option for you. Or if you are a subscriber to something like Kindle Unlimited or Everand, which gives you access to ebooks, if you are a big Kindle reader, you could potentially read them on your Kindle. So those are just some options to look into if you want to try to read them before bringing the books into your home. Whenever I wasn't able to read the book before bringing it into my home, for example, I have subscriptions to bookish services. The primary one is Book of the Month. Almost none of those books that are coming into me every month are going to be books that I read, because they are brand new releases. So I'm never going to have an opportunity to read those before they come into me, right? I also have a Fairy Loot subscription, and most of the time I don't know what book is going to come into me. And I try to limit the subscription services that I have when I don't know what the book is going to be, because there is always an equal likelihood that I will or will not want to read the book that is in that subscription, right? And if I'm continuously bringing books into my home that I don't actually want to read, that is going against the purpose of being more conscientious with my book buying. So currently, Fairy Loot is the only subscription service like that. But any time that I brought a book into my home that I haven't read, another thing that I did was almost immediately add it to my TBR, or at least put the audiobook on hold at my library. So if a book comes into my home that I haven't already read, I immediately either add it to this month's TBR if I can fit it in, or I will at the very least put it on hold at my library. And when that hold comes in, that is when I go ahead and prioritize reading it. So it's not just sitting on my shelves waiting for me to get to it whenever. It is actively on my radar, and I am prioritizing it. Something else that I noticed that I don't do, that I know that a lot of other content creators do, and this is great for them if it brings them joy, is that I really don't request arcs. And what I've noticed is that a lot of people are requesting arcs because they apparently want to read these books so badly, but then they don't actually read those books before the books come out, which completely negates the purpose of the arc, right? I am also a person that believes that if you are going to request an arc, you should prioritize that arc before the release of the book, because the reason they are offering arcs is for the publicity. And so that is definitely something that I don't do, just because I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to the arc prior to its release date, especially if it's a physical arc and not an audio arc. You know what I mean? Which are now becoming a thing. And that is something that I could consider. I could consider doing advanced listener copies instead of advanced reader copies. But then again, that is just another reason that I would no longer be focusing on the books on my physical TBR, because I would be prioritizing those arcs, right? So luckily, I really don't have to worry about that. So that's not going to be something that affects my ability to lower my physical TBR. But I do know that that is probably something that does contribute to other people's ability to read the books on their physical TBR. So those, I would say, were the biggest decisions that I made when I realized that I had a problem, that I was having a physical TBR that was growing, and I wasn't prioritizing those books, and I was just adding to it, and I was getting distracted by the shiny things. And that's something else that I also had to consider, right? I am human. I'm going to get distracted by the new and the shiny, and so I needed to keep that in the back of my mind as well. I had to allow myself at least a little bit to be able to enjoy the new and shiny, because deprivation never worked. Absolutely do not deprive yourself. Don't go on a book buying ban, because that is never going to work. You're going to feel so deprived, and then you're going to go out and you are going to buy all the things, and you're just going to make the problem that you are trying to tackle worse. But I would also say, have a system in place that still allows you to tackle your physical TBR without letting it get out of hand, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, you either have to be prioritizing reading way more on your physical TBR than you are bringing in, or you have to conscientiously change the way that you are approaching book buying. I had to tell myself that I do not need to own these books right here, right now, if I'm not going to read them very, very soon. Not having these books doesn't mean that they are going to disappear. Not buying these now is not going to make me forget that I want to read the books. So I had to completely shift the way that I thought about book buying. I know some other things that people do is they will give themselves a system. Like for every 5 books from their physical TBR that they read, they will allow themselves to go and read 1 book. Or maybe they have a system where, let's say they bring in 8 books one month. Next month, they try to read 10 from their physical TBR. And that is how they try to keep it on balance. So there are definitely a lot of ways that you could go ahead and tackle this. And like I said, I am in no way, shape, or form saying that the way that I did this is going to work for everyone. I'm in no way, shape, or form saying that this is the right way and the way that you should tackle it. No, in fact, you should find a way that is going to be good for you in order to lower your physical TBR. I just wanted to come on here and kind of share what I had to do to get down my physical TBR because it was becoming overwhelming for me. And I also know that some people are not overwhelmed by having a physical TBR that's large. I just know for me, it wasn't necessarily overwhelming to have a large TBR, but it was overwhelming for me to know that the longer they sat on my shelves, the more that I knew I was going to lose interest in those books and the more likely I was going to unhaul them without reading them. And that right there is what I was trying to avoid. And so I wanted to create a system for myself that was going to allow me to get distracted by the new and shiny while also allowing myself to focus on my physical TBR as well and not let them fall to the back of my mind and forget about them entirely. All right, everyone, that is it. I think those are all the points that I really wanted to touch upon today. I hope that you found it at least a little bit useful or maybe a little bit inspiring. Maybe it's going to help you create your own system for tackling your physical TBR or changing the way that you approach book buying in the future. If you already have kind of a system in place for tackling your physical TBR, please leave any of those comments down below to help other people who might be interested in learning more. Or if you made it to the end of this video and you were not feeling chatty, go ahead and just leave me a stack of books in honor of large physical TBRs. And as always, if you like this video or if you just like me, please be sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I typically post 2 videos a week, one on Wednesdays, one on Sundays, and I would love to connect with you in any of those future videos. Or if you'd prefer to connect with me outside of YouTube, you can always find links to my Goodreads, Instagram, and Patreon linked down below, along with any books I may talk about in a video. Until next time, y'all. Bye.